Good evening, welcome. I'm John. the event director and a bookseller here at Literati Bookstore, virtual Literati Bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. We're so pleased to welcome Jodi Klein this evening to our At Home with Literati series in support of the launch of First Date Stories and in conversation with Robin Gelfenbien. Just a quick overview for our attendees. If you're just joining us, the chat is open this evening, so you can please feel free to open up that chat window and share with us throughout the event. I'll also be dropping links to purchase for First Date Stories and other links to some of Jodi and Robin's websites and podcasts, etc., in the chat as well. So stay tuned for those. You can also use the Q&A feature on your toolbar. It's separate from the chat to submit any questions you have for the Q&A at any time, and I will ask a selection at the conclusion of the conversation. And live transcription is available to you should you need it. At the bottom of your screen, there's a little CC icon down there should you need subtitles throughout the event. And of course, if you're watching us later on YouTube, this is not live, so you cannot submit your questions, but you can like and subscribe to find more of our events as they become available. And as a reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeast Michigan or the Ann Arbor area, our doors are, of course, open to the public for in-store shopping. Most of all, we'd just like to thank you for your attendance this evening, or this morning, or this afternoon, or much later in this evening, depending on where and when in the world you may be joining us. And now I'll introduce tonight's author and our moderator. Jodi Klein founded First Date Stories, the podcast and the blog, as a platform for women to share their tales and wisdom so that others can overcome the trials of dating and midlife and find the long-term love they seek. Jodi's an entrepreneur, a marketing executive with over 2 decades of high-tech experience, real estate broker, and the president of Espoir Ventures, LLC. She's a graduate of UC Davis and holds an MBA from the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan, just up the road from me. Jodi lives with her husband in San Francisco, where she spends time working with nonprofits on social causes and rooting for her favorite sports teams. You can find more information at jodiklein.com. Robin Gelfenbien is a self-proclaimed ambassador of fun, a New York City-based storyteller, host, writer, and comedian. She's a 3-time Moth Story Slam winner who has performed on PBS, Risk, Mortified, and countless other shows. She's also shared the stage with comedy greats like Hannah Gadsby, Trevor Noah, and more. Robin is the host and creator of the critically acclaimed storytelling show and podcast Yum's the Word, which has been featured on CBS Sunday Morning and has been named the New York Times Critics Pick and Time Out New York Critics Pick. New York Magazine called her solo show, My Salvation Has a First Name, a Wienermobile Journey, quote, the highlight of the fringe. She's also performed her original comedy songs at the Kennedy Center, Lincoln Center, and on Sirius Radio. She starred in a commercial directed by Spike Lee. Please join me in welcoming Jodi Klein and Robin Gelfenbien into your living rooms.
Hello, hello. Hey,
Hello.
Jodi, how are you?
I am thrilled. I'm so excited to be here tonight, and I just can't wait to get started.
I am so excited that you have me hosting you tonight. I'm on the East Coast. Jodi's on the West Coast. This is a very exciting night, and I want to know where everybody else is tuning in from, so drop it in the chat. I see that we've got Lorraine is tuning in from Miami. We've got Oakland in the house, Maplewood, New Jersey. I'll wave to you right across the river. New York, LA, Berkeley, Madison. I know we've got some other people in Ann Arbor. We've got people tuning in from places like Stamford, Connecticut. Very exotic. Sleepy Hollow. Oh, how exciting. Cambridge. Yeah, we've got people crisscrossing the country, and we are so thrilled to have you. Jodi, I'm so excited for you because your book is kicking ass. Can you tell us what happened this morning when you went to the bookstore?
When I went to the bookstore this morning, the most amazing thing happened. My book is sitting on the bestsellers shelf. It is sitting on the bestseller shelf with David Sedaris's book to the right.
Amazing.
And Michael Lewis's new book on the left, and Amanda Gorman's amazing, mind-blowing poem, Kitty Corn, like diagonal right there.
That's awesome.
I couldn't believe it. I actually broke out in laughter, like giddy laughter. It just was amazing. It still is. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, ride
Absolutely.
that high, because you know what Amanda Gorman, Michael Lewis, and David Sedaris are saying right now. They're saying, oh my gosh, we can't believe that our book is right next to Jodi Klein's, because we know that you are on to do great things. So we have so many things that we want to go through this evening. And I wanted to start out by asking you, Jodi, a few questions about the book. And for those of you who haven't seen it yet, why don't we both hold it up, Jodi? This is officially.
Here it is.
Why don't you give us the official title?
First Date Stories, Women's Romantic and Ridiculous Midlife Adventures.
I got a couple of those.
Awesome.
Okay, so did you always want to write a book?
Oh, no. I did not always want to write a book. No, that was not part of my plan in life. I mean, when I sat in English class, whether it was, I don't know, at Brandeis, North School, Crocker, Simcoe High School, Davis, I want to give a huge shout out to friends from those years who are joining tonight. When I was walking the halls with all of you, I was not thinking to myself, one day I am going to write a book. I was thinking about other things, but I decided to write it when I realized that nobody else had. And when I saw a need, this idea came to me, and I took it from an idea to a desire, to a dream, to a drive to get it written. And this month to a reality that it has been published.
That's a huge accomplishment, because I feel like it's so easy for people to say they want to actually write a book, but then when you bother to like sit down and write, it's a huge endeavor. So I really applaud you for like crossing the finish line. And not only that, you've turned it into like a podcast and a blog and now a book, and they're all about first dates. And I heard that you were recently referred to as the first lady of first dates, which
yes,
seems like a huge honor. So what is it about first dates that appeals to you so much?
Well, I'm going to answer your question, but not right away. I'm going to answer your question with a question for everyone who's joining us tonight. And I'm going to ask everyone who's joining us tonight to answer yes by putting a Y or a heart in the chat, or an N for no in the chat. And my question is, have you been on a first date? Okay, let's see. Have you been? Okay, yes, it's coming in. Look at all of those yeses. Yes,
a lot of Y's.
And yes, and yes, and yes. Okay, we are seeing affirmative. Yes, 50 or more. Yeah, of course, Caroline. Yes, all right. It is. And I see no no's. Did you see any no's, Robin?
I don't see any no's. I saw people like me who wrote the whole word yes to just emphasize how many rather than doing the why.
Right. And why is that? Because it's a universal experience. Unless you are going to be celibate and dedicate your life to a religious belief, or you are such a recluse that you just don't want to interact with anyone for whatever reason. Even arranged marriages, people have to meet. They have to go on a first date. So it is an inevitability. And it's something that we all experience. But so often what is written about first dates is negative. Reddit, Twitter, whatever. It's all negative. And much of it is negative. And I wanted to reframe it for people, because really a first date is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to meet somebody new. It's an opportunity to learn about yourself, certainly learn about them. It's opportunity potentially to start a new friendship or romantic liaison and long-term loving relationship, or as an opportunity for a good story and for you to get the heck out of there eventually. But it is an opportunity, and it is a necessity. And if you're going to want to meet someone and be with that person as a friend or as a loving companion for life, you have to go on a first date. You have to go on a third. You have to go on a fifth, ultimately for you to arrive at that point. And I saw too many people stepping out of that and not showing up for first dates.
You, at the beginning, when you were describing like how most of us have been on them and there are a few exceptions, my uncle is a Roman Catholic priest. His name is Father Gelfenbien. It's a long story. But I'm going to have to ask him if he ever went on a first date, because I know he entered the priesthood pretty early. So I'll get back to you on that. Yes. So other than the feeling that, like everybody can connect to this, were there other reasons that were really driving you to write this book?
There were. First off, as I said, nobody had written a book about women going out on first dates, true stories in midlife. And I wanted to create it to entertain. I wanted to create it to give people laughs, eye rolls, enjoyment. We all need stories these days, especially, and some fun. And so I wanted to create it for that reason. And since I have published it, or She Writes Press has published it, it has turned out that I'm hearing from people saying things like, I should have written this book. I could have written this book. So it is something, like we said, that is so relatable. And then there were deeper motivations that I had for writing this book. And it really is about celebrating and supporting women who are never coupled, divorced, and widowed. And I want them to feel like they are part of a midlife posse, and encourage them to keep their hearts open to love that may come their way. One of the ways we connect as women is through the sharing of our stories. We learn about each other through the sharing of our stories. We derive empathy for others. We experience empathy for us. We get validation for our lives through the sharing of our stories. But often when you are dating in your midlife years, you know far fewer women who are in that place than you did when you were in your 20s and early 30s. So it can seem like more of a solo journey. You're not hearing those stories, and then you can feel very disconnected. And as I alluded to before, people drop out because they're frustrated. They don't think love is coming their way. They don't have that support piece in their lives. So I really wanted to take that reality and the truism that I said earlier about first dates and bring them together to hopefully create an entertaining collection of stories that help women pursue what they want, either consciously or subconsciously, and stay on the dating roller coaster, because I have been there. And I know what it's like. And I know it's not easy to stay out there in the dating scene for so many years. I was out there for a quarter of a century, more than a quarter of a century. And most people don't raise their hands and say that sort of thing. But I just want women to know that they're not alone in this journey, and to keep showing up for it.
It's very inspiring. I think it's an important message for a lot of people who I know, certainly. And yeah, so just showing everybody the book once again. So did you come across any challenges when you were writing this book? Did you have any trouble when you were writing the book?
Well, trouble. Lots of rewrites, but I guess for sure, because writing a book is certainly not let me restate that. And I'm actually going to take a moment to do some acknowledging right here, because I could not have written this book alone and gotten it out to the world alone. So I wrote it, in seclusion, in a solitary way, but I did not bring it out to the world alone. And I've learned through this whole experience that it really takes a village and perhaps a metropolis to get a book published, and so I do want to take a moment to say to people who are joining this evening that whether you contributed a story to the anthology or you gave me input into early versions of the stories, for example, you were part of my awesome short story writing group that I was a part of for 7 years called the Dueling Pens, or you edited the book, or you proofread the book, or you offered advice along the way, or you asked how the book was coming along, or you kindly listened as I bent your ear, because there are so many ups and downs in this process, or you blurbed the book, you gave me the book, an early review, or you are She Writes Press and Brooke Warner and you published the book, or you helped spread the word about the book, or you are involved in the sister projects, which we've talked about, doing an episode with me on the First Date Stories podcast, or contributing to the blog, or you're one of my She Writes Press sisters, or you just heard about the event tonight and you thought, well, this sounds interesting. I think I'm going to show up online. I just want you all to know how extraordinarily grateful I am to all of you, because I would not be here tonight without all of you helping me get here. So with that said, one of the biggest challenges I think with this experience was that I wrote a collection of true stories that were based on people's recounting their stories to me. There are 11 stories in this book. That means there are 22 protagonists in this book, which means that I had to create more than 22 voices, points of view, etc. for this book. And I got to tell you, Robin, that was not easy. Not easy at all. That's
sounds like a Game of Thrones
than
episode.
A basketball team, like two basketball teams, so or at least the play on the court. So it was a lot of characters. A lot
to juggle. I never watched Game of Thrones, but I heard that it's sort of similar in that you got to track all these different storylines and characters. So doing that on your own is even more impressive. Now, how did you collect these stories and decide like which ones do I keep, which ones do I like jettison? Like, was that a hard process?
Well, I alluded to the fact that that people contributed the stories to me. So I asked people I knew. I asked people if they knew people who had memorable stories. I heard a lot of stories. I took down and transcribed just in notes a lot of stories, and then I went through all of those, and I worked to pull out the ones that had something memorable and meaningful happen. I did not want this just to be a book of disaster dates, and I didn't want it just to be a book of romantic all the way to the altar sort of dates that went that way. Ultimately, I wanted it to be real life. I wanted it to be a collection. And I also, as anybody who's read it know, that I included in the book a story about a pandemic date, someone who went out during the pandemic. So it's relevant since sadly we're still in many parts of the country, or all of the country, in that place. So I then, after culling through all of that and really found the gems that achieve those goals. I was really wonderfully surprised when I worked on the dating takeaway tips and discovered that each of the stories contributed different dating takeaway tips to the collection. So there really wasn't overlap. And I thought, wow, there's a puzzle here. There are a bunch of pieces that have come together in a puzzle that is now this book. And that really was wonderful, just wonderful.
Like, not to do any spoilers, but is there one dating takeaway tip that surprised you out of all of the ones that you heard?
Well, the dating takeaway tips are the ones that I derived from the stories. So I would say that one of the most important ones is to just talk to anyone.
I do.
Yeah, you do. So just don't be reluctant to walk up to somebody and just put your hand out and say, hi, I am fill in the blank. So that is one of the tips, and that takes courage. But what's the worst thing that can happen? They don't give you their hand. Of course, we're not really shaking hands at this moment in time, but eventually we will be again. So I think that's one of the most relevant and ones that have the most impact. Yes.
That's a good one, because I know a lot of people are really introverted and that would scare the hell out of them. But I think, just giving yourself that exercise to like continue to like exercise that muscle is a really good challenge. So
exactly. And I've got tips in the book, like follow these and here are things you can say and so on. So give you a little push forward and
it's like a Jewish mother, a little nudge, just a little nudge here and there.
Something like that.
What?
Something like that. Yes.
Yeah. So in the book's introduction, you share some like really great insights into this like wonderful aspect of dating when you're in midlife, and obviously some of those challenges. And can you talk about some of those?
Yes, I can. I'd be happy to. So as John said in his introduction, I've already spoken about, I dated longer than most, and later in life. And I'm what I called, it's a term I coined for people like myself, men and women, seasoned dater. So I'm a seasoned dater. And there, yeah, I mean, what do you think?
I love it. I think
You
it's
love it?
great.
Okay, awesome.
It's like it's a nice spin on it.
Yeah, well, it's true. I mean, I was in meaningful relationships through the years, but until I met my husband, Michael, there was really not a relationship that I was in that was worthy of going the distance. But what became abundantly clear to me is that it was different to date in my 40s and later 30s and such than it was earlier. And a big part of it was just, it was better. You know, I knew myself better. I could, and we women in this stage of our lives, we can show up without as many concerns about really being in touch with who we are. We can take more risks, for that matter. Because we know ourselves better. We've had more time with ourselves. We're actually, we have more life experiences. We're more interesting as people, men and women, more interesting as people. Definitely. Because we've just lived more of a life. We're more emotionally mature, and we have a better sense of what we do and don't want in a partner, because many of us have been in committed relationships that didn't work out. So we now know, okay, not that. We don't want to repeat that. Let's look for somebody who has other characteristics. Sure. and so on. So there's all of that knowledge that helps drive us forward. At the same time, realistically, as we get older in life, there's just more stuff that comes into our lives that we have to deal with, of all sorts. And so it is just more challenging sometimes to find the time and to be able to focus on dating. And I did some surveying around this and drew out of all that what I call 6 dating deterrents. These are not things to keep people from going out in the dating world, but these are deterrents. And I've never seen them all collected in one place. So I'll take us through them. And I want everyone to know these are not universal. There are ones I'm sure that are out there that I have not mentioned, but I'll just start with the first one being supply and demand. Logically, there are more single people when you're in your 20s and 30s than when you're not. So supply and demand is a dating deterrent. Number 2, life's complications. We got mortgages, we've got loans, we've got family members to take care of. We have a pandemic that we're living through that has loaded a whole bunch of unfortunate consequences onto our lives. All of that. So we just don't have the focus and the time. Won't you agree?
Absolutely. Especially with the pandemic, because it introduced like a host of so many challenges. So it's impressive that anybody can go out on a date this time.
And there's risks, and all the risks came with that tragedy. And traumas and all of the rest that we have to navigate through. So all of that. And then we've got the societal pressures. I mean, unfortunately, society still has this thing that women are supposed to be coupled by a certain age. And that
I've never heard about that. Teasing you.
And it's hooey because we're not in an age where you as one family and the other come together by trading cattle, right? It is not that way any longer. There are no dowries any longer. It's not an economic transaction. It is a different deal these days. And still there is this pressure out there. And I know I got it where people would, because they cared, looked at me and say something like, how are you not married yet? Or you must be too picky, or something along those lines. And it was well-meaning, but it wasn't so well received. And I know they came from the biggest of heart and the best of place. Number 4 is ageism. Sadly, we live in an ageist society. So you go on to whatever your favorite app is, and you look at preferences of ages, and there may be somebody your own age is looking for somebody 20 years younger. I've had that happen to me, and you're like, what the heck? But it seems to me that ageism might be changing a little bit and lessening a little bit. I was in that bookstore today, and there were a whole bunch of magazines on the shelves, and I scanned them, and there were a lot of women on those covers whose ages and faces age-wise resembled mine. So that was promising. And number five, I can count, 5 is fear of getting hurt again, going out there, because who wants to do that? But you need to be vulnerable in life and show up for life to have things like this, happen, and you be able to meet the right person. And then 6, I already spoke about, and that is community support. The 6 being the dating, the 6 dating deterrent. Yes.
It's great. It's very inspiring. And I think people will get so much out of the book, not just from the stories that they're going to relate to, but the tips that you're describing, these 6 dating deterrents. I think you've nailed them all. And if I think of others, I'll let you know, but I think you've pretty much gotten them down.
Okay, cool.
So when I host shows, I like to make it really interactive with the audience. And I know Jodi is totally interested in hearing about don't worry, we're not going to put you on camera. You're good. You can still sit there in your boxers or whatever you're doing back there. We want
your bras.
Bras, boxers, briefs, bralettes. So we want to know, just tell us in the chat, what is your most memorable first date? I will tell you, I have 2 that come to mind. Who here was a fan of the Smurfs? Put a Y in the chat if you know the Smurfs or you're a fan of the Smurfs. So when I first moved to New York, this woman wanted to set me up on a blind date. Okay, so Jen, I think that's my friend Jenny, Lorraine, Lori. Yes. When I first moved to New York, this woman was like, I want to set you up with somebody. I'd never been on a blind date. I was like, and I'm talking true blind date, no photo, no stats. And I'm like, I'm new here. I'm going to be open. This guy, I went out to dinner with him, sat right in the window near the sidewalk so people could keep walking by us. He looked exactly like Gargamel from the Smurfs. He was the evil villain in the Smurfs.
Oh no.
Oh yes. Oh
yeah.
No. So it's also, like, while I'm telling you my next one, tell us in the chat if you have any memorable first date stories, just in a couple of lines.
Let's see it, folks. Just a line or two, like what came out of your most memorable first date? Like I know haiku. No, I mean, that's a lot of pressure.
That's a lot of pressure. And then the second
sentence or two.
Yeah, we want to hear from you. And then the second one that came to mind, I don't remember when this was. I don't know, maybe like 15 years ago. I had met this guy on JDate, and he was from Israel. He seemed like really sweet. We had talked on the phone a bunch of times and decided to go out. And when I got to dinner, he showed up with this enormous bag. And he had told me that he was moving from Israel. He had just moved from Israel, and he was trying to work in finance. He was working in retail at the time, just to kind of like, make some money. And so when I show up at the date, he has this enormous gift bag, and it is filled with gifts from the 99-cent store. And it was like 13 pairs of Bobby socks. There were these, there were candles. He bought me a purple candle, a red candle, which was very sweet because he had asked me my favorite colors, which are purple and red. And then this was, there were so many things in there, but I will just say the thing that struck me the most was that he gave me 2 uninflated Mylar balloons that said, "You are so special." Oh. And I was like, if I'm really special, you would put helium in them. But that's beside the point. So
that's so funny. That whole big bag was for you. It was a potpourri of gifts, all for you.
I felt so loved. I really did. I was just like, oh, that's very sweet, but like, no, thank you. And I'm like schlepping all this stuff home on the subway. So does anybody have a memorable first date they want to share?
I think we're not seeing it coming from the chat.
It's fine. They know the
Okay.
Smurfs. I'll take it.
Okay.
Okay, so we've talked obviously a lot about different types of stories, and who is ready to hear some of our stories tonight? Because Jodi's going to share some stuff from the book. I'm going to tell a true story, and then we've got another person who's going to be sharing her story. Her name is Gail. I don't want to give away too much, but I'll just say she's a relationship and dating coach. So she's got an interesting perspective on this topic. So Jodi, are you ready to read from your book?
Yes, I am going to put these on, and yes,
And I'm going to keep mine on, and I'm going to say ta-ta
Okay.
for now, but I'll be back.
Okay.
See ya.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye for now. Hi. All right. So we're reading from our stories. So I am going to share with you the opening vignette of the introduction. And this is something that happened to me. And so here we go. How about we get something to eat? Brad asked as we left the independent bookstore where he'd suggested we meet. Sounds good to me, I responded, smiling. I was pleased that he looked like his Match.com photos and that his personal specs, height and eye color, were as advertised. I'd been on too many dates where the man who showed up wasn't true to the guy who I previewed online. Brad didn't disappoint. We strolled down Santa Cruz Avenue, chatting under the early afternoon sun. The conversation flowed nicely. We hit many of the first date standards: hometowns, jobs, weather, sports. I easily kept up with his gait and sensed a slight bounce in my step. It didn't matter that I had absolutely no idea where we'd be eating. I'd let my handsome 6-foot companion surprise me. As we approached the local grocery store, Brad veered off the sidewalk. I followed him across the parking lot and into the store, all the while wondering what he could possibly need to pick up. Was he running an errand on our date? Brad headed directly to the deli counter. I watched him as he leaned down and surveyed the cornucopia of salads and prepared food on display in the glass cooling case. He stood up and waved over one of the deli assistants. When she approached, he rested his pointer finger against the glass to direct her attention to the mound of pre-made food in front of him. I stood speechless, my eyes transfixed on Brad's every move. Can I taste the corn and chicken salad? He asked. The clerk handed him a small fork and one bite of salad in a plastic ramekin. He turned to me. What are you going to taste? I glanced into the case. I'll try the lentil salad, I replied cautiously. She'll have the lentil salad, Brad repeated to the grocery employee in a familiar manner a man uses usually when he's ordering for his companion at a restaurant. The plastic cup with its spoonful of salad remained untouched in my hand as I watched Brad taste his way through most of the items in the display case. I was baffled until it hit me. He'd taken me to the grocery store's deli counter to sample food for free for our first date. Yes, that was a real first date that I went on. And so for those of you who don't have this book yet, I'd like to explain the construction of it. So we've got the short story. Then after every story, I've written up a section called the rest of the story, where you learn what happened between the two people, if anything happened between the two people after the date. And then I've already spoken about the dating takeaway tips. So those are also after every chapter. And then there are quotes from renowned women sprinkled throughout the book. So I'm now going to share with you the rest of that story, since it's actually not in the book. So because it's in the opening or the introduction. So after I realized that that was lunch and that was what he wanted us to eat together, sort of, I was so horrified and so mortified and so just angry that I decided, and embarrassed, that I decided to buy a whole slew of salads and prepared food from those grocery store employees. And I had a whole grocery store bag filled to the brim, which I took home as soon as I left the grocery store, which I did shortly after my aha moment. So I now have shared with you the rest of that story. All right. Well, it's time now that we shift to the second storyteller. And I want to tell you, I am so honored to have Gail Weiner as a featured contributor to the First Date Stories blog. Gail is a licensed marriage and family therapist who works with women in midlife and beyond who want a deeply, deeply satisfying and meaningful romance that lasts. Through her company, which is called DateWise, she combines her training as a therapist and a writing coach to guide women in crafting really compelling online profiles and authentic romantic lives. She has written really terrific blog posts for our blog, and some of them are, and this one is a total standout in SEO. It gets so many views and so much traffic, which says a lot about what people are curious about today. The first one is called, Why Does He Only Talk About Himself? And another one that she's written is Change How You Date and Make It Stick. We recorded a podcast episode together last season of the podcast, and it was called Can I Trust Him? And you can find all of this at firstdatestories.com. And this evening, she's sharing with us a story of her very own. It is, again, my great pleasure to welcome you, Gail, and to ask you to share that fabulous story. Thank you.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. Thanks for including me in the festivities tonight. And hello, all of you people out there who, unfortunately, I cannot see, but I'll try to imagine you. That's a lot of what dating is about, isn't it? What do we do with our imaginations, and can they serve us, or do they get in the way? So as a therapist who works with single women, this isn't the kind of thing I usually share in public, but in the spirit of sisterhood, fun, and just in case it might be useful for your own dating life, I offer my first date story. The profile. Strangely, perhaps, I didn't quite know what he looked like, and so it was a mystery just who I would be looking for. His picture online had been one of those reject at first glance ones, a dimly lit, poorly angled selfie. That left me wondering, is he even up for trying? I could see that he was stockier than my usual type, edging toward what an unsympathetic viewer might call fat. Would that make him more accepting of my imperfections? Or am I settling before I even begin? And all of this just felt like the inevitable wages of dating again in my 50s. 2 years older than what I'd sworn and clearly stated was my upper limit. He'd reached out anyway, confident or just presumptuous. I wasn't sure if the raw number of his age should be a deal breaker. Would I be wheeling him around 10 years from now? Or find myself marinating in a surprisingly juicy happiness? Maybe I'm naive or just a bad planner, but I'd thought dating would start with considering where to meet, not end-of-life scenarios. I was ambivalent too about his ex-football player status. 10 years ago, every boho prejudice in me would have shouted, no! But an unhappy marriage with a stringy, supposedly leftist man had me questioning my taste and my requirements. To clue you in to just how confused I was, I showed the profile to my newly minted teenager, for a balanced perspective. He sounds like a player, Mom. Oh, my heart sank, thinking he might be right, that maybe I was starting my next big romantic mistake, shoveling another load of increasingly limited years into a pit I'd ultimately have to walk away from. But I wasn't ready to let go yet, not without knowing more. Because in case you haven't noticed, I have some weaknesses, which his profile deftly exploited. One of them is words, textured, evocative, sensual words. His unrolled like breeze over bare skin. And then there were the images. His dipped me in warm salt water and placed me back on sand at sunset, dancing to the complex rhythms of steel pan. He was wry, too, cutting all that richness and making me laugh. Oh, and did I mention that throwaway line about singing? His, for someone who's half deaf, I'm preoccupied with the sound of things. And yeah, there was that Ivy League thing. What can I say? I am not a snob, and I wasn't scanning for pedigrees. But old as I am, a guy's got to seem somehow in my father's league. In this case, Ivy. Plus, it'd give me room to be smart, right? And I told myself, potentially seen, despite the fact that my father never had. And of course, that was the real draw, that he'd be kind of like my dad, but giving me what I needed this time around. The date. Within a week, I found myself in the rare position of being first to arrive. It was St. Patrick's Day. I'd written him that I'll be the one wearing green. Positioned myself inside, off to the side of the cafe's open glass door. I assessed each man who moved toward the entrance. Was that the body, the height, the hair? I popped my head out into their path, tried a few tentative toms, and got back smiles and shakes of the head. A few minutes in, I thought I saw him. Oh my God, you're kidding me. Kaleidoscopic swirl of impressions, shock of silver, bright blue, sun-browned, strong shoulders, moving with grace, a real smile, and his hello, deep and soft. Okay, this man is delicious. He sounded genuine too, apologizing for being 5 minutes late. I told him, in my book, that's early. And hey, where's my medal for showing up on time? Another quick smile, his eyes lingered. You're much better looking than your pictures. Equally flattered and put off by the bald appraisal, I answered, isn't everyone? Thinking of his picture then. He laughed. No, not at all. We waited in line for our coffees, morning sun streaming through the glass walls in the clattering, chattering room. I mentioned the childcare snafu that had me changing the day we'd meet. Carefully neutral, mustn't criticize the ex. He insisted on buying my drink then. You deserve a reward after going through all that, shooting me a sympathetic glance. Did he actually get the unsaid story of my impossible ex from those few words? He'd already taken my side on faith or insight to ingratiate himself, or because every divorced woman with a child has the same story to tell. What I did know was that it felt sincere and new and very, very good for a moment to stop questioning what I had done to bring the pain of that marriage on myself. I asked him about singing. He told me the tale of Miss Martin, his high school choir teacher, and there was a lot to tell. He cried for a moment, remembering, and I knew then that music had saved him. When our second cups arrived, we resettled at the curved zinc bar, the room now like a box of sunlight. Climbing up onto the high red stools, we juddered them toward each other, angling to face each other. When I was close enough to hear him in the noisy room, I stopped. He kept moving. Did this happen all at once, or was it gradual as the movement of conversation? All I know is that at some point, I found his thighs wrapped around mine. My thighs snugged inside of his, touching all the way from knee to hip and hip to knee, as if this was the natural, obvious way for us to sit together. It was 10 a.m., people, a weekday. I had not known the man an hour ago beyond the page. I have to tell you, I was shocked. And even more shocking, I didn't mind. I felt completely sexually claimed and utterly at ease. When we were done, back in my car, I turned the corner where he was waiting for the light to change. He didn't see me. He was looking down, deep in thought, intensely inward, processing, sorting, absorbing the start of what would be, and still is 12 years later, the best relationship of our lives. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This is what we got to reap, falling in love after so much experience, holding fear and fantasy still as companions, but no longer in charge, able to claim our gifts and vulnerabilities, clearer-eyed, aware of loss, but willing to risk despite it, choosing play and unashamed of wanting. These nourish the ground of love for us, as I hope they will for you. And as a quick reminder, if you'd like to consult about your romantic life, I'd love to hear from you. I'm offering everyone who's here tonight a complimentary hour to help you move toward a satisfying love. You can email me at datewise@icloud.com or hop onto my calendar at www.datewise.now.com, and that information will also be in the chat. I wish you well. Thank you.
Gail, that was a beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing. I have a very, very, very important question for you, which is it at all an accident that you are wearing green tonight, given that you met on St. Patrick's Day?
Well, I'm going to call this turquoise, but it's in the same family.
Okay.
And I would say that there's something of a metaphor there, that the flavor of your first date very often infuses and sets a template for the relationship that is formed after that. And I, along with Jodi, believe that first dates are very, very important for a certain kind of imprinting.
I love how thoughtful you are with it. That it looks very green to me, but I can appreciate, and I also love turquoise. Also, when you were talking about selfies, all it made me think of are the bathroom selfies that guys like to take. Any men who are watching who are single, dude, don't do that. Don't take pictures of yourself in the bathroom. That's my dating deterrent. So, and let's drop all that information in the chat so you can follow up with Gail if you need some help in the love department. So thanks, Gail.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to share a story right now. Want to emphasize this is true. A lot of times when I tell the story, people find it really hard to believe. But I'm going to start recording myself on my phone because that's just my process. So, all right, here we go. So 20 years ago, I am riding across the Golden Gate Bridge on a absolutely gorgeous Saturday morning with Rick. Rick and I have just met at this party a week ago, and he has asked me out. And I am psyched because Rick is funny and he's smart and he's cute and he looks like he just stepped out of a J. Crew catalog. And the best thing about Rick is that he has not said the 5 words that I absolutely hate. Wow, you were really cool. Because after hearing that so many times from so many guys, I quickly learned that, wow, you are really cool is code for we are never going to sleep together. And now I am a more experienced cyclist than Rick. So he asks me for recommendations for rides. And I'm like, oh my God, I have the perfect ride for us. And I decide that we need to go on this ride called Paradise Loop. For those of you in San Francisco, put a Y in the chat if you know what I'm talking about. Now, I'm like, Paradise Loop. I'm like, this could be super romantic. And it weaves all throughout like Sausalito and Tiburon, and it's absolutely stunning. It is a 45-mile ride, and I am hoping that this is going to be like way more than a bike ride. And I'm also really excited to be on this ride with Rick because I had gone on a few rides with this guy, Ted. We had also met through cycling. I was really into him, and Ted was very different. He was like quiet and mysterious. And he looked like he stepped out of a Men's Health magazine. They were totally different. But it'd been a few weeks and I hadn't heard anything from Ted. And I'm like, this is not the kind of mystery I'm looking for, Ted. And I just didn't really know where I stood with him. So Rick and I are riding across the bridge and he tells me 2 things. One is that he hasn't slept the night before. And I was like, it's okay. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. Like, we can stop as often as you need to, because in my head, I'm thinking like, the more we stop, the more we can hang. And the second thing he tells me is that he's never ridden more than 20 miles. And I'm thinking, what's another 25? You'll be fine. So we are riding through Sausalito and Tiburon, and this scenery is absolutely picture perfect. And we're flirting and we're bantering and we're chatting. We are having so much fun. Finally, we stop and we have a little picnic and we're looking back over the bay at San Francisco, and everything is going according to my plan. Like, oh my God, we are just having such great banter and I'm feeling like really good about Rick. And at one point he like puts his hand on my arm and I'm like, kind of like Gail with her thighs. And anyway, so we start making our way back to the city. And we pass this really popular bike shop. And I look to my right, and riding alongside me is Ted. And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm thinking like, I don't want to mess up my chances with Rick, but where have you been, Ted? But I don't say anything. And so we keep riding along. And my head is totally going into overdrive. I'm freaking out. I don't know what to do. So I introduce them. And as soon as I do it, I know it's like the worst thing I could have done. And I'm like, oh my God. So now I'm deflecting like how I know him and how I know him. And I'm trying to like make everything seem like completely normal. And then Ted says that he's heading back to San Francisco. And Rick, because he's so lovely and charming, says, oh, why don't you join us? And I think, sure, Rick. There's nothing I'd rather do right now than cock block myself. So the 3 of us are riding back together. And I am so frustrated. And little by little, they start getting ahead of me. And they're starting going faster. They start going faster and faster and faster. And I am riding with all my might, trying to catch up with them to no avail. And now I'm totally freaking out because I'm thinking like, does Ted know I'm on a date with Rick? Does Rick know that I was maybe dating Ted? Like, does Ted know if Rick's into me? Does Rick know if Ted's into me? Or like, maybe I'm not even part of this equation. And like, maybe neither one is interested in me and they're interested in each other. I have no idea. All I can focus on are their hot asses because that's all I see ahead of me. And I am just so aggravated. A little while passes and Rick drops back and he's like, hey, you doing okay? And I'm like, I'm just so annoyed. And so he says to me, haven't slept. Like I said, I didn't sleep last night, and I'm kind of running on fumes, and just wondered if it would be okay if Ted and I met you at the bridge. And I'm so annoyed, but I don't say anything, and so I say, okay, that's fine. And so Rick and Ted take off like they've just been released from prison, and I am still writing as fast as I can because I'm still determined to catch up with them. And then I realize, I know a shortcut. So I like peel off at this one part. And I've done this ride many, many times. And so I'm like riding along, and like a good 20 minutes go by and I don't see anybody. And I'm like, well, that's okay. No big deal. You'll be fine. And I keep riding. It's like another 20 minutes pass, and I still haven't seen anybody. And that's very strange to me. And at a certain point, I realized like I'm completely lost. I have a really good sense of direction. So this just adds to my frustration. And this is 20 years ago. So I can't call them. I have no GPS. Like there's no way to reach any of them. There's either of them. And so as I keep riding, I'm feeling so desperate until I see this truck. And I flag it down. The guy pulls over, and I say, I'm pointing at this like huge hill that's like easily like a 45-degree angle. And I say, hey, is the bridge this way? And he's like, yeah. I said, oh, okay. And he says, do you want to ride? And I'm like, yes. And I'm so thrilled. So I run to the back of his truck. He has this big flatbed truck. And I am just so focused on like, let me get the bike up and let's get this sucker rolling. And I look up, and strapped to the back of this flatbed truck are 8 porta potties. And I'm thinking, you gotta be shitting me. But I'm like, Robin, you have no choice. So I throw my bike onto the back of the flatbed. I like hoist myself up, and then I take my hand and I kind of snake it through one of the tires and like grip the right side of the flatbed. And then I do the same thing on the left side, and I'm racing the other side of the truck. And I'm like, go. And I'm holding my breath because it absolutely reeks. And so we're riding up the hill. And I'm like, you can do this. You can do this. You can do this. And at a certain point, we hit a bump. And one of the porta potties starts like rocking side to side. And I am like, oh my God. And so I'm like, you cannot die this way. You cannot die this way. You cannot die this way. And I'm still fixated on this thing. And finally, it levels off, and I can finally exhale. And we keep going. And I'm thinking, I hope Rick is waiting for me. At the very least, I hope somebody is waiting for me, because up until this point, I've been living with my roommate, Kristen, who is like blonde. She will like walk into a bar and sneeze, and 8 guys want to buy her a drink. She gets guys left and right. And she, at this point, is dating 4 guys. They're all named Mike, and she's come up with different nicknames for them. There's the Bear, there's Guitar Man, there's Ass Man. So every time I'm answering the phone and the guy says it's Mike, I'm like, I have to decipher which Mike it is. And I'm thinking, like, I never get that guy. Like, just give me like Ass Man. I don't care. But at this point, I'm going, please just let me just get Rick. Let me please just get Rick. So we keep riding up to the top of the hill. I jump off the bike, I wave to the guy, and I thank him, and I go flying down the hill. And off in the distance, I see Rick, and I'm so excited. And I want to get his attention. So I start yelling at him, Rick, 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 Rick. And I'm like this, like, Coke the pageant queen. There's nothing sexy about what I'm doing. And I finally pull up next to him, and he says, Robin, I know I didn't sleep last night, but did you just come from the complete opposite direction? And I was like, yeah. And I explained what I had done and all the crazy stuff that had happened. He's like, do crazy things like this happen to you a lot? I go, all the time, all the time. And he says, wow, you were really cool. Oh, I am so crushed, absolutely devastated, because I really thought that this was the one. And so I head home to where I'm most comfortable, the friend zone. And over time, I learned that a lot of times guys will say, wow, you're really cool, because they don't have the courage to tell you that they really like you. So now when the guy says to me like, wow, you're really cool, I'm totally cool with that, because I learned that, like those 8 porta potties, love can be a bit of a crapshoot. Thank you. All right. So we are going to turn things back over to our, thank you, Jenny. Turn things back over to our wonderful host for the evening, John. So thanks, John.
Thank you. We
Oh my
have time
gosh.
for Q&A. We just have one question in the Q&A right now, but if you have time, this is your final chance to submit any questions you might have for Jodi using the Q&A. But we do have one question, and I'll ask that. And if it's our only question, that's fine as well. Jodi, earlier in the event, you mentioned you gave thanks to all the people who made this book possible, and mentioned She Writes, and both their publishing arm and the other facets of that entity. But there's a question here about what happened to get the book published. So maybe if you could dive a bit deeper into everything from the drafting process through to finding a publisher, through to seeing the book that we do today, for those curious about transforming something like perhaps their own podcasts or blogs or whatever into a work that people can take off the shelves at home.
Okay. That could be a very long answer, but I will do a Reader's Digest version of it. But before I answer that question, Robin, that was such a stellar story. And I'm glad
thanks.
I was on mute because I was laughing like crazy.
I would love to have heard your laughter. I never hear laughter anymore.
It was great. And Gail, thank you so much for sharing your story as well. Really appreciate you both so much, and the tales you told.
And you,
okay,
you as well.
Thank you. So I mentioned earlier that I was part of a writing group, and that was really helpful. Short story writing group, to be with a group of people who are writing all sorts of different types of works, and to do exercises, writing exercises, and to workshop each other's writing is something I really recommend to folks who are interested in going forward down this path, which whoever asked this question must be. So that's a great place to get your legs under you. And then once you think you've got a manuscript underway, you need a good editor. And you need to find an editor that you can work closely with. And because there's a lot of revs that you need to do typically, or I should say I needed to do, but from other authors I've spoken with, they say the same things. And so you got to rev it, and you got to get it to a place where the manuscript is strong and tight. And if you're going to take it to an agent, you got to be ready to do that. If you're going to just pitch it directly, you just need a tight manuscript. And then at least for first round, because once you get a publisher, then that if you have approached it with a manuscript in hand, you then are going to need to do additional editing and additional proofreading and so on. So that cycle goes on and again and again. And then depending on who you're working with as a publisher, there's the matter of how you put the book together physically and what the cover looks like, and the creative and guidance, giving input if you're able to that part. So it's a whole other dimension, and it's very important to understand who your future reader is going to be, who you hope your future reader is going to be, because you want that cover and that whole packaging of the book to appeal to them. So thank you, Robin. So there you are. So, and then you take it through a lot of different cycles of more reviews. And because, believe it or not, even doing so many reviews, you can miss things. And then it goes to what's called an advanced reader copy stage, which is then sent out to early reviewers and to bookstores and other places to consider distribution and commentary and blurbing of your book. So that ultimately then, after that part's done, you have the book ready to be printed and sent out into the world.
Thank you. That is an incredible distillation of the process.
It's a lot of work.
Gail writes in, how do you both think about quote unquote marketing yourself while also wanting to be authentic?
How do we want? Okay. So Robin, do you want to go first or do you want me to?
Sure. I mean, funny sidebar. I used to drive the Oscar Mayer Weiner mobile. So I am very comfortable with promotion. Obviously, when you're promoting like a giant hot dog on wheels, it's one thing. But I also, I feel like, people always get nervous about promoting themselves and marketing themselves because they think like there's too much attention on them. But if you look at it from the perspective of like, what are you going to get out of this? And like considering what the audience is going to experience, then if you reframe it that way, then I think it's a lot easier to do that, because then you can like share it from a perspective of like, this is a gift for you, or you're going to like learn XYZ or whatever it is. So I think when you reframe it in that regard, it helps a lot. I'm known as a shameless promoter, but I've taught classes on this actually quite a bit because I've also worked in advertising. And I think it's helpful. And it's just like we were talking earlier about talking to people directly, like putting yourself out there. It's a different way of putting yourself out there. But if you look at it from the perspective of the audience and what they'll get out of it, then I think it takes a little bit of that pressure off.
In terms of my journey here that has gotten me to this point, I would say that historically, as a marketer, professional marketer for so many years, decades, I was the person behind the screen. I was the person who was giving guidance and writing what the person who would be standing right here would be saying. So for me, this has been a big step forward from behind the screen to in front. And I realized if I was going to do this, the only way I could do it successfully is to be authentic, because we live in a world right now where people want to get to know the folks who are sharing with them whatever it is that they're sharing, and social media exasperates that in a way, or or elevates it is a better word, elevates it. And so I had to do it that way. So in terms of a little bit of history here, when I got the idea for the book, as we've talked about multiple times, it takes so long to publish a book. So I wanted to streamline the ability to elevate women's stories. And that was why I started the podcast. And so we're in the 4th season of the podcast. There are no stories in the book that are from the podcast. So those are 2 different animals and 2 different entities. And I learned also through the podcast that my guests are being authentic and sharing what is happening in their lives. So I, as part of our conversations, do that as well, because it is the right way to proceed in this day and age. And because, it's all about being true to yourself and being your true self to the world, I'd say.
I would agree. And I saw that Gail had an addendum to her question, which was she wanted to know about marketing yourself online as a potential partner and still being authentic. And I have done my share of online dating. So I would say that I always just felt like I want to show more than tell. So just finding pictures that really represent who you are. I think is important. And then just having like answers that are really genuine. I hate to say this, but I know it's true. Like men mostly look at the pictures and they don't read anything. So I would say like less is more with the copy that you're writing about yourselves. But just on the heels of what you just said, I think it's just like stay true to who you are, and you don't force it, because and also don't like BS people, because people totally can see right through that.
Well, and if we're taking this to the dating realm, it doesn't benefit anybody to not be them true selves, because you don't want to fake it through a date or a series of them, because ultimately your real self is going to come through. You're there to be yourself and true to you, not to pretend to be someone who you think the other person wants you to be. one day those veneers drop and it's the real you, and you need to be in sync and aligned as people. Otherwise, it's not gonna work out. Yeah.
Totally agree with you on that.
I think we have time
It's a
for
slippery
one.
slope.
We have one last question here. Lorraine wants to know, Jodi, what is next for you in this journey?
What is next for me is to keep focusing on the book and getting it out there, and to see how people respond to it, and to chart a course from there. This is just week 2, and it's all about seeing where things go from here. So I will figure that out. I'll check in with you later, Lorraine, and everybody else, when I've got a few more answers in that regard. But it's really now to take it forward. And I will be taking it forward to Los Angeles on Thursday, where I'll be in Culver City with 2 other amazing authors, Leslie Rasmussen and Lori James, at a bookstore called The Village Well in Culver City. So just because it was set up, I'm just gonna say it. So if anybody's in LA, would love to say hi. But for now, I am in Ann Arbor and loving it. And I will just say that there is no other place outside of California that I wanted to do this virtual launch with. And because I'm a fanatic about independent bookstores, there was no other independent bookstore I wanted to do it with. I may be in San Francisco right now, but my heart is in Ann Arbor. And I am so grateful to you, John, for this opportunity. And I am also doing a big call out to everybody who's on with us tonight, who I went to the Ross Business School with, or who lives in Ann Arbor. It's just a major go blue to all of you.
Go blue. Thank you so much, Jodi. And I think that's our Q&A. So I'm happy to turn it back to you for our closing remarks.
Okay, fabulous. Well, I will follow up that thank you to John and Literati Bookstore with a thank you to you, Robin.
Thank you.
I had so much fun doing this with you. In case anyone
too.
wondered how we came together and got to know each other, I took a short story, excuse me, let me restate that. I took a storytelling class from Robin and had a blast. And here we are now. So thank you so much, Robin, for doing this.
Thank you for having me, Jodi. That was a wonderful story. I'm excited for your book.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. And I'll let you keep going.
Yeah, so just a few other things I wanted to mention. One is I did talk about the podcast. We have a new episode dropping on Thursday. It's called Aaron and Sarah. And if you want to follow up the laughs you had tonight with more laughs, it is just an incredible first date story, between 2 first date stories over like a decade and a half. It was really, really, really a terrific story to record, and I just invite you all to listen to it. And if you are here tonight and you are married, if you're in a long-term relationship, and you know a woman who isn't, I really encourage you to get in touch with her, text, call, just check in, as we all love to be checked in with, especially during a pandemic, and ask to hear her stories, ask to find out what's going on with her. And I do want to be clear, because I haven't had a chance to say this earlier, that by no means do I believe that a woman needs to be coupled to live a fabulous, meaningful, just really kick-ass, incredible life. She doesn't, we don't. But for those for whom it is important, I want to help elevate stories to help you all move forward down that path. So in conclusion, I would say, no matter where you are in life and what you want to achieve in life, I encourage you to believe and keep showing up.
And I would just add, my aunt has been going, she's 80 years, never got married. She's 80 years old, impressive. I just want to leave everybody, first of all, thank you again, Jodi. Thank you, John. Thank you all for coming tonight. Just a reminder to pick up First Date Stories. We have a link in the chat so you can pick it up from Literati. And, you know, the holidays are going to be here soon. So grab a few for your friends, neighbors, loved ones, whoever. Just make sure you grab a copy of this book and have a great night.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Thank you both for joining us. And to all of our attendees, thank you for joining us as well. Robin and Jodi, hope to have you both in Literati Bookstore in person sometime in the not too distant future.
That'd be great.
Until then, continue to stay safe and be well. And to all of our attendees, thanks again. And we'll see you at the next event. Take care. I'll have a great night.
You too.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.